Why are you sitting there? That seat's not for people like you. What would you do if a flight attendant told you to give up your assigned first-class seat, just to please a wealthy passenger? Would you stay silent or stand your ground? This isn't just a story about a seat. It's about dignity, power, and the moment everything changed. If this hits something inside you, like this video and subscribe for more stories that speak truth. The click of designer heels on the jet bridge floor echoed like a metronome of entitlement. Gate 14 had just begun boarding Orion Air Flight 227 to New York, a red-eye flight favored by C-suites and VVIPs. The kind of flight where Seat 1A wasn't just a number, it was a statement. Julian West was already there. Dressed in a charcoal wool blazer and dark slacks, he sat quietly in his assigned seat. 1A, his carry-on was stowed, his tablet powered on, presentation slides queued for review. The cabin around him buzzed with hushed greetings and subtle glances, the usual pre-flight choreography. First class was only half full when Aaron Davis, a flight attendant in a sharp Navy uniform, approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she began, tone smooth, practiced. "There seems to be a small issue with your seat assignment. We have a regular VIP flyer who usually sits here. Would you mind relocating to seat 3C instead, still in first, of course?" Julian looked up, brows tightening slightly. "This is my seat," he said calmly. He reached into his wallet and held up his Orion Prestige Elite card alongside his boarding pass. "Julian West, seat 1A booked 2 weeks ago." Aaron's smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. "I understand, sir," she said, voice soft but cool. "But Ms. Langford flies with us frequently and always takes this seat. It's kind of her spot." A rustle in the aisle. Victoria Langford, white, mid-50s, sharp suit, pearl necklace, and a leather handbag worth more than some cars, stood tapping her watch. Her gaze swept over Julian like he was furniture. "I always sit there," she muttered, just loud enough. Julian said nothing. The seat was his, legally, logistically, and ethically. Yet he could feel the shift in atmosphere, the subtle tension, the sideways glances from other passengers pretending not to watch. The silence of people who heard everything but wouldn't say a word. Aaron leaned in slightly. "I just think it would be smoother for everyone." Someone in 2C lifted their phone just enough to record, pretending to scroll, camera open. A modern witness. Julian exhaled. Slow. Steady. He looked back at Aaron, then at Victoria, then down at his boarding pass again, as if confirming something that never needed confirmation. "This is my seat," he repeated, voice low but firm. And for the first time, the air in first class felt just a bit colder. Julian West had never liked making a scene. At 41, he'd learned that silence often spoke louder and smarter than protest. His expression rarely shifted in public. His words were measured, his tone polite always. A calm exterior wasn't weakness, it was armor. He wore a navy suit tailored not for flash but for function. Crisp lines, no tie, just enough elegance to command a room without begging for one. His shoes were scuffed from long airport terminals. His eyes were tired not from lack of sleep, but from years of needing to calculate whether standing up for himself was worth the cost. Tonight, he'd hoped to avoid calculations. He'd picked seat 1A intentionally. More legroom for his tall frame, easier access to plug in his tablet, peace and quiet to run over the final slides of his keynote address. In less than 12 hours, he'd be standing on a stage at the AI for Ethics Global Summit in Manhattan, delivering a talk titled "The Cost of Bias in Customer Experience." The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent the last 6 years building Westnova, an AI company that helped banks, airlines, and retailers audit their own unconscious bias. His technology measured things people didn't even realize they did, offering different loan options, different tone, different treatment based on someone's name, voice, or face. He'd built software to change that, but software couldn't change people like Aaron or the sharp-tongued woman with the designer bag who called his seat hers. That was something else entirely. Julian shifted in his seat, staring at the boarding pass still clutched in his hand. It had his name, his seat, his status. And yet, here he was again being asked to move, to make space, to disappear politely. He closed his eyes for a breath. No headlines, no shouting, no drama, just, once he wished it wasn't like this. But tonight the insult didn't whisper. It landed hard, sharp, and public. And this time Julian West wasn't in the mood to fold. Julian was 10, the first time he saw dignity get dressed down in silence. It was a rainy Thursday, and he was tagging along after school while his mother, Denise West, attended an awards reception at the city hospital where she worked as a trauma nurse. She had on her pressed uniform and her Sunday heels, the only pair she owned. A quiet pride lit her face as she held the invitation in one hand and his smaller hand in the other. The VIP lounge was on the 12th floor, reserved for visiting specialists, board members, donors. But today it was also for honorees. Denise had saved 3 lives in one shift the week before. They were honoring her. The elevator opened. They stepped into a carpeted hallway where the lighting was softer, the air cooler, and the silence louder. A security guard stationed outside the lounge looked up, then down at their hands. His eyes settled on Julian's mother, and the smile on her face didn't even have time to fade before the man said it. "You must be in the wrong place." Denise blinked. "I'm here for the ceremony," she said softly, showing the invitation. Still, the guard's expression held firm, doubtful. "This area is for staff." "I am staff." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Eventually, someone came from inside. A white nurse in scrubs recognized her, waved them through. But the damage had already been done. Julian saw the shift. His mother straightened her shoulders, stepped past the guard without a word, and smiled like nothing had happened. But that night when he watched her quietly wipe off her makeup in the bathroom mirror, Julian saw it. Not rage, not tears, just a kind of tired sadness. And that was the day he made a promise, not out loud, not even to her, but to himself. That one day he would build something. Something that didn't flinch at a face, didn't doubt a name, didn't erase someone's worth just because they didn't fit a mold. Years later, that promise would become West Nova, and tonight it was being tested all over again. Victoria Langford didn't hand Aaron the envelope. She glided it into the attendant's palm like it was part of a dance they'd done before. Thin, folded once, discreet. It looked like nothing at all, but the weight of it was unmistakable. Aaron stiffened for a second, glanced down, then tucked it away without a word. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just turned and walked straight to Julian's seat again, this time with someone else in tow. Brian Cole, VIP cabin manager, mid-40s, silver hair cut close, shoulders squared like a man who loved authority. He approached with a practiced smile and the kind of voice people used on customer service lines when they hoped you'd give up quickly. "Mr. West," Brian said, leaning slightly into Julian's space, "I've been made aware of the seating concern. Ms. Langford is one of our most frequent flyers and prefers seat 1A. We'd like to ask you respectfully to accommodate her request." Julian didn't even look up at first. He tapped a note on his tablet, finished the sentence, then lifted his eyes, calm but locked in. "This is my assigned seat," he said, holding up the boarding pass again. "I booked early. I checked in on time. I've complied with every policy your airline has." Brian's smile faltered. "We understand, and we're not questioning that. But for the comfort of all our VIP passengers," Julian cut in. "Are you suggesting my presence is uncomfortable?" Brian's eyes narrowed. He bent closer, lowering his voice to a private hiss. "You can cooperate or escalate, your choice." Julian blinked once, then slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it with a touch and hit record. "This is Julian West," he said into the camera, tone measured. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat with a confirmed first-class ticket and elite status. I'm being asked to move not for policy, not for safety, but because another passenger wants this seat." A ripple of awareness passed through the cabin. Phones emerged, subtle at first, then less so. A businessman in 2B angled his camera. A woman near the aisle started typing furiously. Then, behind Brian's shoulder, Victoria Langford stepped forward again. Without shame, she reached toward Brian's suit pocket and slipped something inside, another folded bill, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for handling this," she said sweetly. "It's just, first class should feel like first class." The camera in 2B caught it all. Julian's phone kept recording, and in that moment the real turbulence began. The cabin hushed the way forests do before a storm. Two airport security officers stepped onto the plane, guided down the aisle by Brian's outstretched hand. Passengers froze, coffee cups paused mid-air, tablet screens dimmed, breath held collectively. No announcement was made. No protocol read aloud. Julian didn't resist. He stood slowly, gathering his tablet and briefcase, buttoned his blazer with practiced calm. His phone, still recording, sat face up on the seat for a beat before he slipped it back into his pocket. He nodded once to the officers who flanked him without touching. No one said it, but everyone knew this wasn't about a seating issue. This was an eviction. He walked with his back straight, eyes forward, past a row of silent faces, some avoiding eye contact, others burning with a quiet shame that wasn't theirs to carry. One man muttered, "Unbelievable," but didn't move. Another started clapping and then stopped, unsure if anyone would join. The only sound was the mechanical click of a phone camera shutter, multiplied across the cabin. At the gate, the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than the crowd. Julian exhaled slowly, almost meditatively, as the officers released him into the terminal. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Their silence felt heavier than words. A voice broke through it. "Mr. West," he turned. A young black woman in jeans and a burgundy coat stepped forward, gripping her phone tightly. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from fury she had swallowed for 20 minutes too long. "My name's Melanie. I was in 2D. I recorded everything from the moment they asked you to move to when she gave him the second bribe." Julian studied her face for a moment, then nodded, not with surprise but gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. Then he opened his phone, typed a single message to his COO. "They just kicked me off the flight. Let's activate the legal team." The 12th floor of Orion Air's San Francisco headquarters was glass-walled, minimalist, and eerily quiet for a Thursday morning. Douglas Kent, the CEO, was halfway through reviewing quarterly projections when his desk phone buzzed, not the external line, but the one labeled internal priority. He frowned, answered, "Kent." A voice on the other end spoke quickly, Janet Liu, head of public relations. Her words came like rapid-fire bursts. "Sir, we have a developing situation." A video. From Flight 227. Kent leaned back in his leather chair, unimpressed. "Passengers complain every day. Have PR issue the usual statement. Sir, this one is different. It's already at 200,000 views on X. Hashtags are trending. Orion discrimination, Seat 1A, Julian West." At that name his fingers froze on the desk. "I'm sorry, Julian who?" "Julian West. We've confirmed through the manifest." The man removed from Seat 1A was Julian West, CEO of West Nova. The silence on Kent's end was instant, deafening. He slowly turned toward his monitor as Janet forwarded the footage. He clicked the link. The video played. Julian seated, calm, holding up his boarding pass. Brian leaning in, whispering. Aaron standing stiffly, eyes flickering with unease. Then came the unmistakable moment, Victoria Langford slipping a folded bill into Brian's pocket. Julian's voice on camera was clear, steady, almost too composed. "I'm being asked to move from the seat I paid for because someone else wants it." Another video played next, a different angle from the aisle, the officers escorting him out, and Julian walking without resistance but with unmistakable dignity. Then Janet's voice came again, softer now. "And sir, there's more." He didn't want to ask, but he did. "How much more?" "We've confirmed through our financial partners. West Nova and its allied funds now own 22% of Orion Air stock. Quiet acquisitions over the past year." Kent's face went pale. His hands, moments ago holding projections for expansion into Asia, now trembled faintly as he whispered, "Get him on the line." And somewhere, deep inside his gut, he already knew this wasn't going to be a PR issue. It was going to be a reckoning. The Orion Air executive boardroom had never been this full or this quiet. Half the directors were still in business casual, yanked out of lunch meetings and conference calls. The others wore golf polos or had just arrived from weekend retreats. But when Julian West entered, flanked by his COO, legal counsel, and a silent assistant carrying a tablet, all conversation ceased. He didn't dress to impress. Same navy suit, same calm, but his presence hit harder than any tailored monologue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. CEO Douglas Kent stood to greet him, unsure whether to extend a hand. Julian didn't take it. "Mr. West," Kent began, already rehearsed. On behalf of Julian sat down, opened the folder in front of him and looked at the board. "Play the video." No one moved. His assistant did. The lights dimmed. The massive projection screen flickered on. For the next 3 minutes, no one in the room said a word. They watched it all, Julian calmly showing his ticket, Aaron's discomfort, Brian's pressure, Victoria's entitlement, the envelope, the bribe, the removal, and finally the young woman's voice after he was escorted off. "I recorded everything, even the money." When the screen faded to black, silence fell again, the kind that throbbed in people's ears. One board member cleared his throat, but no words followed. Julian looked up. "I won't take much of your time," he said, "but I'm going to be extremely clear." He slid a typed statement across the table. "These are my terms." A beat. First, immediate termination of every staff member involved in the incident, no suspensions, no reviews, just action. Second, the $50 million partnership between Orion and West Nova is canceled. Third, your entire company will undergo mandatory anti-bias and ethical treatment training, designed, implemented, and audited by my team. Kent leaned forward, desperate, sweating. "Julian, Mr. West, let's not throw away years of negotiation. We could suspend the employees, at least conduct internal interviews, issue apologies." Julian didn't flinch. "This isn't negotiable." His voice was like steel wrapped in velvet. "It's accountability or bankruptcy. You can explain the difference to your shareholders later." No one moved. No one argued, because everyone in the room knew he wasn't threatening them. He was giving them a choice. And it was the most generous thing he could have done. The firings came fast. Aaron Davis, Brian Cole, Captain Mitchell Hawk, each received a termination letter hand-delivered by Orion's HR department within 48 hours of the board meeting. No press statements were released, but none were needed. The internet had already done the work. Clips from the cabin spread across platforms like wildfire. Side-by-side edits, reaction videos, breakdowns. Hashtags like Seat 1A and "This is Julian West" trended for a week straight. Their faces, once anonymous fixtures of routine flights, became cautionary symbols of what unchecked bias looked like in real time. But Julian didn't stop with retribution. 2 weeks later, West Nova launched the Second Step Initiative, a first-of-its-kind rehabilitation program for service professionals who had lost their jobs due to discriminatory conduct. It didn't offer absolution. It offered education, mentorship, and a path forward, if they were willing to walk it. Aaron applied quietly, ashamed and uncertain. The program required full participation in group sessions, community work, and a personal reflection journal. She didn't speak much at first, but she listened. And somewhere between her 4th session and her last, something shifted. She was later hired as a ground crew coordinator at a regional airport. The work was harder, the hours longer. But when a tired traveler with broken English struggled to find his gate, she walked him there herself and smiled. Brian came reluctantly. He scoffed at the coursework, rolled his eyes at the vulnerability. But one day after a session on invisible systems, he sat back in silence. "I never saw myself as racist," he said. "I thought just being polite was enough, but I was blind. I chose not to see." And Captain Hawk, grounded for good, asked to stay on as a volunteer. He now teaches onboarding modules for Second Step, walking younger pilots through the cost of silence and the currency of compassion. As for Orion Air, they didn't just recover, they transformed. Service scripts were rewritten, uniform training reimagined. A new slogan quietly emerged on employee lanyards: "We see people first." At a press conference marking the 6-month anniversary of the incident, Julian stood at the podium. Cameras flashed. Reporters waited. He smiled, just barely. "Justice isn't just removing the bad," he said. "It's building better and making room for return." And the room, like seat 1A, felt earned.